Hello, Angelo, and welcome on the Nexus. I am talking to you from Bern, by the way. And
Great.
I understand you're, well, bonsoir. I understand you're from Switzerland as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So I just want to also point out that I believe it is past 10 p.m. your time. So I want to express even more of my appreciation for you being here. And yeah, so my name is Mark. I'm talking to you, as I said, from Bern. I started doing the podcasting and writing articles about, I don't know, perhaps not quite a year now. And yeah, I'm trying to maneuver myself into this space of alternative media because I just see journalism as dysfunctional in most of our media. And I suspect you might concur on that one.
So, but it was the frustration you felt one day. You said, I had enough. But it's like, I feel that I like to relate to this to the pain. The pain level. You need to get the certain pain level and frustration. So you see, there's several movements I've seen, like people actually out of Ukraine that started. Actually, Gaza, I see a big move. I mean, people, they do not know. You see, the way it starts is that you don't know where to start from. Where do I start from? Do I go to a protest? Where I need to do something, because you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, Angelo, what the fuck are you doing? Really?
You're complicit if you don't do anything, right?
No, but are you doing something? I mean, do something.
Yeah.
Remember Aaron, this guy, his name is Aaron Bushnell.
Yeah,
he said,
the guy was involved in fire.
what would you do if your country was doing a genocide, was part of the genocide?
Yeah.
And he said, well, you are doing it now.
This is so interesting because you're hitting the hammer on the nail, by which I mean, I've been writing, so as you said, it takes a certain threshold of pain until you start. And to me, it all started with just writing down some counter arguments to me being online and listening to public intellectuals. I guess it started like most people with people like Jordan Peterson. And over the years, I've read books and I started being more and more interested towards geopolitics. But I believe, and I have a few questions to you on that one, that most of the people in this space have a very strong sense of ethics. And this is exactly what you're hitting, this is exactly the nail that you're hitting on its head, right? And in light of that, so I was firstly gonna do a little introduction on you personally, but since we're already right in the topic, let me just continue with the flow. And as I wrote on in my book, this is precisely what you said. And one of the things that in my book, I haven't published it yet, but one of the things that I wrote about is that contrary to, for example, what Kant says, is a bit more philosophical in the ethical realms, right? Contrary to what Kant says, intentions do matter, but secondarily at best. What actually matters is the consequences downstream of your actions. And in that light, if you're too ignorant, that is, knowledge is required to be ethical, right? And if you're too ignorant to actually foresee the consequences downstream of your actions, you cannot be ethical. And yet, it is very much harder to condemn people who have good intentions, but are just too ignorant to see what happens. But it is just as unethical, right? So what is your take on the relationship? Like, my question to you, my claim is it requires knowledge to be ethical. Otherwise, you cannot be. And what do you think about that, that idea?
We need to work on the mind. You see, Einstein, Einstein, he said quite a few interesting things, but he said you're not going to solve a problem with the same mind that has created the problem.
Oh, yeah.
You see the mind. And when I say the mind, is maybe the lenses. We have a problem of lenses, and this comes at a very deep level. That's education, that's the whole part, right? That's what is your journey, your education, and there's a subconscious and conscious mind, right? And we need to be that level of awareness. And the problem is that people do not have that level of awareness. I mean, that's our society that wants us to be ignorant. Keep in mind that, there's a purpose there. They want to make us numb. How do you make people numb? There's different ways. Once you enslave people, so you are 24/7 working, so you are enslaved and you're on survival mode. If you're working 24/7 and you barely have enough money to put a roof over your head, you don't have the luxury to even think. You barely have enough. I mean, your obsession, I know how it is. Your obsession is about, can I get 4 hours sleep?
Yeah.
And can I get, okay, then you have drugs, then you have drugs, alcohol, then you come up home and you watch Netflix and porn. I mean, just we say in French, l'abrutissement des masses, just they don't want us to think. That's the whole, it's the news is becoming the entertainments. I think you probably you get some stuff from Jordan Peterson, that is actually telling you that, it's they want to confuse people, but ultimately when you look at this social engineering project, it's really, they do not want us to think. And if you do think, you are going to think about the wrong thing. What I mean by the wrong thing is that it's a divided and control system. So you need to divide people over clusters, over identity and so on.
Gender.
And gender, and they need to. It's a project of deconstruction of human being. They demonize people that love their country, that love the family concept. The traditional thing, because it's about deconstruction, and ultimately it's about isolating people. Because they know that if you join forces, the 99% that can fight the 1%. Because ultimately, I don't want you to enter into Marxist-Leninist theory, but ultimately it's a class struggle. I do believe it's a class struggle. And everything that we touch upon, I can relate it to a class struggle of the 1%, which is fighting the 99%. At the local level, nation states, individual, and also geopolitics, because geopolitics is the same. When you look at the World Economic Forum, it's the same. It's the globalist elites, which are the 1%, and us, the 99%.
This is
yeah.
I was just gonna interject and just my agreement. It's interesting because I think I don't know if I take the same path as you, but when I analyze different situations, as you mentioned, like the Occupy Wall Street or geopolitics or the current globalist movement or anything like that, ultimately, you try to dig deep as deep as you get. Like you have these levels of complexity, I guess, or levels of appearance, and it would appear on first glance like it's a conflict between, I don't know, between some ethnic divisions or gender or whatnot. But as you dig deep, I do, as you just said, always keep ending on the class struggle. So I do think there is it's precisely that.
I don't know if you remember, the Black Panther back then, they were very smart. Actually, was one of the defining moments where they realized the Black Panther, they were fighting against I think there was the Proud Boys, the white guys, but, and what they had in common was they were poor. They sat around the table and they were like, oh, you seem like a redneck. Are you really racist? And they were digging. And actually it was a cool thing to be like redneck, the South and so on. And then the blacks, did they really care about race? No. They sat around the table and they say, wow, you know what? We have in common that we are poor. It does say, why are we focusing on this? And ultimately, it comes down to this ultimately. Chinese, I'm bringing lots of philosophy from China because I've been here 30 years, but Chinese, they have they don't believe in white and black. There's a middle path, and what they say is that they say, look for what unite us and set aside the differences. And when you look at the political system, it's the same. And when they apply their lenses, politics in China, and it's because of history and culture, but it needs to be uniting. Ultimately, when you take a decisions, you need to please somehow, not to please, but people need to be content with the solution that is going to be for the 100%. In the West, it's very different. You have a system that is written by the elites. So the rules of the game are written by the elites. So whoever writes the rule of the game control the outcome of the game. That's very simple. Really, you and me, we can play a game. If I write the rule of the game, I can make sure that I'm going to trash you all the time. But in order for you to play, you need to have the illusion that it's a fair game and that somehow you have a free choice. So in the West, you have a dividing effect. Basically what they do is that what they call the healthy democracy needs to be confrontational.
Yeah.
And sometimes you end up in a mob, what we call a mob rule. Mob rule is that practically you could end up having 51% of the population, which is ruling at the expenses of the 49%.
Yeah.
And what they call a healthy democracy, they call it vibrant democracy, it needs to be confrontational. The same as when we see the Republicans and Democrats. The only way it can work in the US is the more they clash, the more people have the illusion of free choice.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if there's no clash, people, they will realize that it's only one party system, and you politicians are obeying to who funds them, not who elects them.
Yeah.
So you see, that's the approach. And it's very culture. If you think about it, it's very culture. One is individualistic and one is actually the common good.
Yeah.
And these are pros and cons. But, individualistic, it has its purpose, why they build up that. And it's not organic. It's really this deconstruction and the path it's taking us to. It's because they want us to be turned into slave labor and consumers.
Well,
You see,
we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm sorry for stopping. Yeah, I want to allow me to try to bring some structure in it, because I do have a lot also to what you said. My latest article was about neocons, and I actually trace back anthropologically this disjunction between individualistic and collectivist cultures, and it all boils down to how what the level of biodiversity is in the environment in which that society evolves. It's extraordinarily fascinating content. It goes back to several anthropologists. We can talk about that later, even though I didn't plan for it, but it's very interesting to see where this schism of culture comes from, because today it's West versus, I guess, global majority. Yesterday might have been communism versus liberalism. And it goes back to Byzantium against the Holy Roman Empire, right? But it goes even further back if you check anthropology. But let's put that aside. If you allow me just to do some housekeeping, you said you had about an hour. Does that give us about until 15 past the next hour, or just so I know?
Yeah, it's good.
Organized. All right. Next thing, I actually wanted to tie it back. As I said, I usually do a personal introduction, but I think most people will know you. I personally know you from the new Atlas with Brian Barletic. I guess it's probably my favorite show because Brian and you do such clean work. I'm a scientist, I'm a physicist, and Brian has this thing where he takes a source, he shows it on screen, he puts the link down there, and he shows the internal contradictions within the Western media. That is just such a clean approach. I just love it. But yeah, in any case, as far as I know, you are from Switzerland, you are an entrepreneur and political commentator, and you have been living in Hong Kong, I believe, as you just mentioned, for 30 years. Is that about right, firstly?
China, I would say Greater China, 50 years. So I've been living in mainland China. I've been living also in Taiwan, in the last 7 years in Hong Kong. Yeah.
I see. So what drove you there?
Just adventure. You see, I was lucky to have a dedication in Switzerland. So I think it's one of the best places you can grow up into, in terms of education. Absolutely everything. It's peaceful. And probably Switzerland gave me the opportunity to get that education, to give me freedom actually to have that choice to go abroad and go for an adventure. So I was working in finance, I was in Zurich, actually. I was, I had the golden cage. And basically I decided to go for, one day I took my backpack and I left and I said, I want to learn Chinese, and I wanted to do a deep immersion into China. And so basically it was a big struggle. 30 years ago was difficult, but I gave it a chance. It's the same as a couple, a couple, you go through the struggle, but you want to give it a chance, it's like, that's the country I elected for my life. I wanted to experience something which was tough. I wanted the tough experience, and I wanted to experience the opening up of China, because China has been closed for a long time. Since World War II, it had been completely closed. So I wanted to go and see for myself and actually experience that transition. And I already saw that back then, China, that was the next big thing, and so I wanted to be part of that opening up of China with my own eyes. And I gave it a chance. And I would say I went through those phases of frustration. I would say I would say at the beginning, it goes from arrogance to being humble. You know, and what I mean by that is at the beginning, I didn't know that I didn't know.
Mm.
Then I knew that I didn't know, and then you become humble. You see what I mean?
Mm.
You
So
know, you once you know that yeah.
Let me be facetious here. So how is the dictatorship over there?
It's the dictatorship of the people. It's very interesting. I actually had an interview just before, but the system, it's very counterintuitive, but it might be far more democratic than in the West. But let me say one more thing. It's very important. What is the benchmark you give in terms of how legitimate is the system, the democratic system?
This is a tough one. I would
That's the
refer
question, because we tend in the West, we tend to simplify. Democratic system is putting a ballot, and it's not. In China, the way they say it, and again, you know, if we are judging China doesn't need to be good for us. It needs to be good for Chinese. You see, that is the first mistake that we do in the West, is that we think that China, we're using our lenses to judge China, but China doesn't need to be good for us.
Indeed.
China needs to be good for Chinese. Who the fuck are we to judge what is good for Chinese, right? Who am I? Who am I? No. And when I talk to Chinese, they love it. I mean, you know, Howard University did a survey on China, 95% love the system. And when I talk to Chinese, I mean, it's 100%. But the difference, why is it 100%? It's because it's a system that has delivered. And Chinese, they're very pragmatic. It's like, you know, you don't go to a Chinese and you say, oh, I'm going to bring you freedom. It's like, can I eat freedom? Can I eat freedom? You know, I mean, freedom of what? You can pee in the street, you can live, you know, you can be homeless.
No, the freedom is to be able to work several jobs and to barely get those 4 hours of sleep, which you mentioned before. But then on paper, you're still free to drive whatever car you want. That's the freedom we want. You see, in reality, if let's go down to the real world. I know this, the idealistic, it's like, oh, freedom, you know, well, freedom of complaining, trash everything, and you do the BLM riot. Oh, that's freedom. That's freedom. You riot for 6 months. Nothing happens. The problem is still there, but you call it freedom. You know, I mean, come on. You see, in the real world is like this. And you know, I'm going to be really rough on that. Money is freedom. Let's be pragmatic. And you know what? I can be spiritual, you know. I tend to believe that we are spiritual being having a human experience. You know, kind of, I throw it there, you know. I'm not, you know, I went to China because, you know, I could have the golden cage. At 20 years old, I was in the hedge fund industry. I could have a Ferrari and a villa at 20 years old. I chose China because I had the spirit of adventure, and money is not my issue. But you see, in reality, in the real world, if you are a millionaire, you have all the freedom you have. Yeah. You can buy a passport, you can do whatever you want. So, you know, we say in French, don't mets pas la charrue avant les bœufs. You know, don't put the cart in front of the buffalo. It means that, you know what, they're looking for tangible results. And I mean, poor people, that's what they're looking for. When you're emerging, and then later on, they are going to have different, you know, it's a Maslow theory, right? But China, even more Chinese, they're very much down to earth. Yeah. The matrix Chinese have, and actually they're very pragmatic. You know, one of the things we don't look at the West is, but you know, first of all, it's first human right, and then we talk about freedom. But basic human right is food, shelter, roof, and access to health. You know. Yeah, I was gonna say that. Well, but you know, one metric, you don't, in the US, life expectancy is the only country in the world that life expectancy is going down. You know what it means? It means in practice, you children will live a shorter life than you. Just think about this. Think about this. You children will live a shorter life than you. Just think about what it does. They're taking away
Time. You know, it's the same as the movie Time. You know, when
Yeah, we have the thing on your
right. It's right there.
Let me just bring up something that that you also mentioned. I also wrote about, which is we have this great saying: "With great power comes great responsibility." Right? And
Yeah.
one of the things that I'm writing, as I said, was ethics, but another one was about freedom, and it's precisely it. So one thing I've been struggling with, and I've been collecting ideas, I haven't finished it yet, is how do you define freedom? I don't know yet the answer. However, I know one thing for sure, just one thing that you mentioned, which is freedom costs resources. You cannot have freedom without resources. And as you just said it, freedom is money. But yeah, so this is, I guess, the main resource. But let's put that aside. It's a bit philosophical. Let me ask you, so what I was going to do is I was going to start with the personal, do some housekeeping, then I was going to ask you some general stuff about the state of the world today, then maybe zoom in on Ukraine and Gaza, zoom in perhaps on China, and in the end I wanted to go about the media. So let me just start with a fairly generic question. You, Angelo, in your words, how would you summarize the situation we have in the world today with this pivotal point from uni to multipolarity? And here's the burning cherry on top, why should people, and since I'm in Bern, why should Swiss people care about this geopolitical change in the world?
But that's 1 hour per question. That's 1 hour per question. You don't have that 1 hour. Let's make it. I'm going to try to simplify. I'm going to be okay. I would say Thucydides trap. I'm going to touch the Thucydides trap. Thucydides trap is in world history, 16 times you had a transition between a declining power and an emerging power. So we had this, you know, one of the examples was World War I, you know, and then you had the World War II, you had the US taking over and being this hegemonic power. But out of 60 times in world history, 13 times it ended up into war. And that's what we're living here. So here we have the World War II, where you had the US was hegemonic. They thought that after the fall of the USSR, you know, it was the end of history, Fukuyama. And then basically, but then what happens that
such an arrogant statement, by the way.
I was extremely arrogant. And in reality, it's very interesting because, oh my God, I need to be careful because otherwise I'm, Emmanuel Todd, who predicted the fall of the USSR, actually said that in reality, when the USSR collapsed, actually, it was the Western world was already declining, and he used demographic data to prove that. But that's another discussion. So it was not the US emerging. It just happened that the USSR collapsed. That society collapsed. So now you have the emerging world, which is actually China, but China, alongside China, is the whole global South. And you need to keep in mind that the US and what the collective West has been doing was not doing better than the global South. It was about containing through the US dollar, containing through blocking their growth, and containing by creating chaos, regime change, and so on. And that's what they've been doing. So China's been leading, and I would say in this idea of multipolar world is that it's not China. I would say would be leading in terms of economics, and I think you have during this transition you have different countries that have different tasks to fulfill, and China is probably the economic powerhouse, and I would say in this transition you have someone that needs to confront NATO, and it's Russia. I would say, just to simplify, but I would say the new paradigm was Ukraine. Ukraine, everything's changed there because we saw the shift of even some allies. We saw different position of Turkey, those shifting countries. India actually went along with Russia and kept, didn't sanction Russia and actually allowed Russia to trade its oil. China didn't align with the West. Actually, China allowed the Russia just to trade in other currencies than the US dollar. And you have basically, a tacit backing of the global South for Russia. And I would say this, now we have Gaza, and Gaza is very similar. It's not only Palestine is actually a symbol of the fight of the global South. It's not about Palestine. It is the global South. And when you see the whole alignment, it's the global South fighting the collective West, because ultimately, the Zionist project is a imperialistic project.
Yeah, wait. I have questions on Gaza. Let us
You see, I can go in all directions.
I realize
And,
that. Yeah.
well, the other side of the question was, how do you see
Why
the other
should
side
people care? That was why should the normal citizen care? Because most of the friends that are more or less my age, they're like, yeah, politics, I'm not interested, without realizing
It's
the
a good
whole.
question. No, it's a good question. The thing is that some people can be really cold and they don't care. You don't experience death. Death of people, the poverty, and how people suffer in the global South. I've traveled extensively. I've been absolutely everywhere. I experienced a short coup in Ecuador in 2000. I experienced a color revolution attempt in Hong Kong. So I was close to chaos. And not war yet, but it's painful. A society which is in chaos and people are dying, it's painful. So you can be cold. If you think about your people that are in a bubble in Switzerland, it's like, well, now if it's okay with you, it's okay. So what can I say? What can I say, really? But I would say, if you can scare the person, is that, you somehow, that imperialistic project, it's the same fight as you have back home. It's that imperialistic project is globalist elites that actually don't care about countries, they don't care about people, and they're willing to destroy things. But ultimately, you're already a victim of that system. And I would say maybe Switzerland is the bad example, because I think we have a healthy society, and we have probably one of the best so-called democracy, direct democracy in the world. But if the person is America, it's much more obvious. The first victim of imperialism, of the globalist elites, are actually Americans themselves. So when they say us, oh, we are fighting that. What you are, what Malcolm X called it, you are the nigger of the house.
I don't know if I can put that on YouTube, but I'll see what I can do.
No. But
I am citation.
No, this is a quote. This is a quote. When you can quote, it's a quote. He actually did a speech, the nigger of the house. Back in the day. So in reality, you are collaborating to a system, but you are still a slave.
This is. I was exactly gonna add my own response to that, which is, ultimately, the question of why should you care is the same question as Bushnell asked, which is, if you were living in a society that was committing a genocide, if you were living in 1930s Germany, if you were living in 1800s US with the slavery all around you, what would you do? And if you tell me, I'm not interested in politics, then my answer to you is, you are exactly doing it right now. And I think this can serve as a hook to hook into people's sense of ethics. And the other one is the more pragmatic one, which is that whatever happens geopolitically is so heavily influential on all of us that we all feel it. I mean, just think about what's happening currently in Germany. Germany is heavily deindustrializing. Germany was the export and industrial motor of Europe. If Germany goes down, in Switzerland we go down. Our heating prices go up. We will no longer have the access to BMW, Mercedes, and so on. And it has all sorts of trickle-down effects. And just as one last note, one thing I've noticed is people are usually extraordinarily sensitive. So people tend to avoid all sorts of imagery or even reports about people being torn apart by bombs, which is currently happening all over the world. And so they sort of shield themselves, back to the bubble, which you mentioned. And I think that there must be some sort of balance between, well, yeah, you can shield yourself, but out of sight, out of mind does not mean it no longer happens, right? And so this is.
I would go further. Actually, just to follow up on what you said on the people being completely, I mean, what they're doing in Gaza. We need to be extremely careful in terms of all society. Maybe this is a test. It's a test of tolerance. If you are tolerant, they introduce that. What was immoral yesterday might be the new normal. Yeah. You see, and we see all society, turning to, how the government are taking over, how the lockdowns, all the curtailing of freedom and so on. if you dig close an eye on what they're doing with the prisoners in Gaza, how they're treating civilians and so on, you know what? You might be next. That's my message. You might be next because that's a test on tolerance. If you accept somehow, that might be the new normal. I'll give you an example. The first images of kill babies, there was a certain reaction. After 6 months, 1 year, by watching those kill babies, well, that might become the new normal. You're not going to be, you're going to be slowly immune, numbness. And that's what they want. It's the same as it was unacceptable. My generation, 30 years ago, it was unacceptable to see homeless in the street. It was unacceptable. Morally, was not. Now it's acceptable, and now it's the new normal.
That's an excellent point. And since it's like I guess you're pointing to some sort of slippery slope. And I think it's the same thing with censorship. If you pay close attention, the first deplatforming, I believe, happened around about 2015. And now we have hundreds of thousands of accounts across YouTube, Twitter, everywhere being censored. And people don't realize, well, I was already back then, I was very shocked and warning that this would get out of control, but it's just people don't realize that these things are, unfortunately, and I hate to be fear-mongering, but these things like censorship and what you mentioned with the atrocity are a slippery slope. Let me continue with a question that draws upon your financial wisdom, since you mentioned that you worked in finance before, which is, how do I order this? Let me ask you first about, I heard a report that China allegedly is covertly buying large quantities of gold. Have you heard of this? And if you have, why do you think China is doing that? What do you think is the game there?
Well, it's very simple. What happens at the system, the US dollar system, it's about you convert your US dollar trade surplus into financing US debt. So it's a Ponzi scheme. So the US, they're spending more money because they buy more than what they sell. So ultimately, they have to issue debt.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you have countries that hold US debt. So because it's a Ponzi scheme, that debt is not meant to be repaid. So China ends up every year with around $1 trillion of trade surplus. So that means that they have excess US dollar. What do they do with this? So China used to have $1 trillion of US debt, which is US bonds. Mm-hmm. They have been decreasing that and they've been buying gold, but at the same time, they're recycling US dollar trade surplus into the Belt and Road Initiative to build tangible assets. So what happens is that they have the choice. Either they have paper or they buy gold and they invest into infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So, but the problem is that for the US, once you start not buying US debt and you start not trading into US dollar, what happens is that you create inflation in the US and that becomes a problem. You see, and now you cannot print endless. You know what the goal used to say, this is the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. Because ultimately the US is living at the expense of the rest of the world because they have imposed upon the world to trade into US dollar. And whenever they have countries like they have a trade surplus, like Saudi Arabia, like China, well, they need to finance the debt. And that debt is not meant to be repaid because the US, the deficit grows, it's not meant to be repaid. They cannot afford, they cannot stop. It's Ponzi scheme.
Mm-hmm. So as a follow-up question on that, I guess 2 follow-up questions. It's what happens when the US dollar loses primacy across the world, which we've seen happening, but what happens in, say, 5 years when this process is maybe not fully achieved, but furthered? Yeah. And secondly, what happens with the exploding US debt that they can no longer, therefore, unroll onto the rest of the world, as you said, with this mechanism as a reserve currency? So
what happens? It's not about replacing the US dollar. It's a US dollar not being as hegemonic as now. Mm-hmm. Because it's not in China's interest to have the U.S. economy to collapse and the U.S. dollar to disappear. So what they need to do is a soft landing. We need to somehow to do like Chapter 11, basically it's about no, restructure U.S. economy. I mean, somehow, it's what we call a bailout. There's a bailout, so that at some point they'll need to sit together and see how we can restructure the debt. It's the same as the restructuring debt that we did for the global south. So that is the problem. But the effect for U.S. economy is going to be like high inflation and a decreasing purchasing power.
So
as simple as
in effect, high inflation means you're unrolling the debt not only onto all of your citizens by siphoning off the value that they've saved up, but you're also unrolling the debt onto the future generations, right? That's what inflation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, what happens that you see once, because when they could do that because it was a global currency. It's a global currency, then it's a bigger cake, and your local economy, you have your local economy, and then you actually provide dollars for the whole world. Now, if it's only your economy, like in Switzerland we'd never be able, if it's a closed economy, the Swiss franc, you keep on printing Swiss franc, what happens is that it's as simple as that. You create hyperinflation because it's a closed economy. No, the Swiss franc is adopted only for Switzerland internally. So I would say the risk is hyperinflation. But what happens that, you see, now just the interest of the debt is equal to the defense spending of the US. So $1 trillion goes into paying interest on the debt. And they have they have no choice. They need to pay reasonable interest rates because of the risk associated to the debt, right? I mean, otherwise nobody's going to buy you debt.
So since you mentioned the military, let me ask you a follow-up question on that one. I believe I got this from either Yanis Varoufakis or maybe it was Thomas Piketty, but I don't remember the source, but as far as I remember with these economists, maybe it was also Michael Hudson, but as far as I remember, one of these, I guess, star economists, what they said is that historically speaking, every time the debt of great superpowers went out of control, be it Germany, be it, I guess, Germany before that, in the World War I, every single time the response was a world war to reset, so to speak, the system. And so let me ask you the more
maybe Ray Gladio. Maybe it was Ray Gladio. Was it Gladio?
It could have been him too. So, question to you: do you deem it more likely that we will have that China will succeed in giving the dollar a soft landing and restructuring U.S. debt and restructuring the U.S. economy, I guess, or do you deem it more likely that there will be an actual horrible war between the two superpowers? Well, the two biggest ones currently.
Well, the question is, are we dealing with rational people?
No.
I mean, that's the answer. We're not dealing with rational people. Just think about what they've been doing, right? And the problem is that the globalist elites, do they care about countries? Not necessarily. As long as the capital can move from one country to another, and you have actually all those structures of, offshore structure and so on. Those globalist elites are, BlackRock, the big families and so on. They move around and they're willing to destroy countries, and they have the backup plan. Actually, some of those globalist elites, they actually become even richer. They gain even more power sometimes with those clashes. So it's hard to say, but I would say, they probably have their backup plan. Who's going to lose? It's going to be the average Joe. But if you are one of those, BlackRock and so on, they are actually buying tangible assets. They're buying lands, they're buying gold, they're actually diversifying. Maybe they have a plan with the crypto assets. I wouldn't be surprised that actually there's the crypto money might be a backup plan. And ultimately,
don't forget Bezos trying to build a life in outer space.
Yeah. I know. I mean, but they're not. Ultimately, I would say that who might be losing is going to be average Joe. So so I would say, if I was average Joe, just your money, just tangible assets, gold, that's the best bet.
All right, so let me go on then. So since I jumped now to this more financial economic question, let me jump back to Ukraine and Gaza, because as you mentioned, I have the same analysis. Ukraine is the current pivotal point that shows it's very complex to put in one sentence, but I guess that shows what a paper tiger, the world's biggest bully, which is the whole NATO alliance is, right? And so I have, I guess, many questions on that one, but one that I would like to see us, that I would like to pose to you, since you also come from finance, is I had been following Chomsky for many years, among others, right? And one thing Chomsky kept saying, especially about the Pacific situation between China and the US, is that even though China is coming up, you know, economically, militarily, and so on, NATO and the US in particular still outspends, for example, China 5 to 7 times, and it's a similar number for Russia, right? I think that Russian military spending was 60 billion prior, and it's some 950 billion or so for NATO. And yet, now we have this war in Ukraine, and we see that Russia, this, you know, supposedly gas station of a country, somehow outproduces the entire West, including Europe and the US, at least 7-fold in artillery, and similar numbers for drones, tanks, IFVs, and so on. And so I was actually kind of surprised to see this military might and this industrial might, even though we have this huge imbalance in spending. And since you come from the financial world, let me just give you my take and then I'll ask you the question. My take is that in the West, you have built up this multiple layered system of parasitic money suckers, such as consultant companies, such as, I don't know, certificate granting companies that give the certificate ISO 775 for the artillery shell, that then pumps back the money to the, I don't know, defense ministry and so on. So you have built this huge house of cards of layered financial parasites that suck up all this money. So we have this tenfold spending, but only produce a teeny tiny amount of actual material, whereas in Russia we have this direct, semi-nationally owned companies that just produce. Is that about correct, or what is your take on the?
It's pretty close. I would make it maybe more simple. Well, I think the metrics it's all about economics. You know, we have a society that are profit driven in the West, and in China and Russia might be like purpose driven. So when you look at let's say education in the US, you know, it's you know, you end up with a lot of debt, and you don't necessarily have a good education. I mean, you did university. You came out of university, you didn't have much debt, right? In the US, you might end up with $100,000, $200,000 of debt. What does it mean? It means it's a profit-driven industry, and it's inflated. That is in the GDP. Mm-hmm. The same as healthcare. I'll give you an example. In the US, the healthcare in the GDP is 18%. In China is 6%. In the US, it's completely inflated because products are inflated, you know, the prices, because there's you know, the healthcare lobby, pharmaceutical lobby, they actually overprice. And that goes into the economy. So when it comes to the defense industry, it's exactly the same. Why Russia is so strong is because it's purpose-driven. It's not made for making money. It's not so. What you have in the West is that you need to adjust it. First of all, you need to adjust it to purchasing power parity. So $1 spent in Russia and $1 spent in the US, it's different. And then you have all those layers that you have the military industrial complex, which is profit-making machine. It's not, while in reality, it should be an army defense. It should be for you defense, actually. And so when you think about defense, you are going to really be careful about $1 being spent on defense. But no, once you start thinking about, I'm going to sell something to the country for making money, then you are going to do F-35. And you're going, what's the budget of F-35? $1.5 trillion? I don't know what's the exact figure. So you have all those levels of corruptions, overpriced things, and also the overstretching of armies like the US, 800 bases around the world. When you have a power projection army, then you become overstretched. And then they've been equipping themselves not for the right wars, because it was insurgency wars. Yeah. Now it's high intensity war. They're completely off. And so, and Russia has been actually, they've been equipping themselves on defense, but for single war, terrestrial war, while when you do power projection, like the US, you don't have a defined goal. China is being only on its defense and one single purpose. It's being working on how we can get Taiwan back and protecting our maritime roads. You know, can you imagine how much waste? So I would say that China, in reality, is probably at the same level of the spending of the US, I would say. In reality, China is at 300 billion US dollar and the US is around 900 billion US dollar.
Defense
This
spending, right?
Yeah, and China is going to increase by 7% this year, and it's going to keep on increasing by 7%. But in reality, I would say dollar per dollar, China is at the same level. But in addition to that, China, you know, if you think Russia is a powerhouse in terms of industrial powerhouse,
Yeah, look at China.
is times 10. Times
Indeed.
10. So that means that if they are going to a war economy, China can actually outproduce by at least three times what all NATO countries produce, at least.
Let me just ask this one question to you too as well. Just it was in the same bulk of question. Were you surprised to find out just how much Russia produced, or were you already
No, I was in the same wagon of people that I was following the right experts. I mean, really, it was obvious. Actually, from day one, I saw that as an opportunity. I was sure that they would destroy their own economy. I was from day one, actually, day one. But because we are surrounded by the right people, you know, I mean, between the Duran, you know, between
Brian.
There was some French, you know, Moreau, you know, Brian, and so on. You know, we are factual, really. We focus on about tangible stuff, and actually, I was very, you know, I mean, Russia did even better than what I thought.
Exactly. So let me just add a caveat. So I was expecting Russia to perform somewhat well because we all know Russia has an insane industrial base, a lot of resources, and so on. So if we assume NATO outspends Russia 10-1, and Russia produces almost as much as the West, that will be a factor 10 in terms of efficiency of industry, right? But Russia outproduces the West 7-1, while NATO, the West, outspends Russia 10-1, which makes a factor of 70. And that is mind-boggling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that is on a short term. If the problem is that there's a lag time. The West could produce much more, but it would take 3, 4, 5 years just the setup time. You need to set up industries. I mean, they could if they really wanted. But imagine, I mean, we are talking about trillions of dollars. I mean, really, the problem is that if you align, you know, if tomorrow you align all the NATO countries at 3% of defense spending, of course, they can. I mean, they could, but just it would be just insane. It would be just completely insane. And ultimately, you know, if it becomes existential, you know, there's a nuclear bomb. I mean, really, do they really want to go that path? I mean,
yeah. Not even a globalist probably will want that. So,
but you see my point. They could in terms of, but the problem is that setup. Why they have a ratio 7-1 is because they don't have the setup. If they tomorrow they go into war economy, then in 4, 5, 10 years time, yeah, they could outmatch Russia. Yeah, they could.
You think so? They'll have to build a lot of infrastructure for that.
Oh, yeah. But you know, I'm talking about, you know, you pour in hundreds of billions of dollars just into the setup of those industries, which are not there anymore, but they could. They could. I mean, the US, I mean, if it goes into, I mean, in World War II, the US was supplying 70% of the weapons for the world. In World War II. I mean, you know, the US supplied the USSR, the USSR won also because of you know, they did the Marshall Plan, it was not Marshall Plan, it was a Lend-Lease agreement.
Lend-Lease. Yeah, but bear in mind, only 4% of the entire Soviet, I guess, machinery was given by means of the Lend-Lease. So 96% was still produced by USSR. So the overwhelming majority. But yeah, let's put that aside. That's a restructuring of the economy into a wartime economy by the West that we're talking about. That is a big, hopefully never happening.
I would think China might jump in just at least in terms of supplying. You know, that would be the only reason. If this, but you know, that race is a race that nobody wins. It's just insane. Just insane. Yeah.
So before I move in and ask you one about Gaza, I just wanted to know, are you also, I believe I read somewhere that the ice north of Russia, I think it's the Arctic ice caps, will be sufficiently melted by 2050 that China can avoid the Strait of Malacca strategic, I guess, trade routes and maritime routes. And that means, in effect, that China, all that China, and I guess Russia in the global south, I guess, all that they have to do to circumvent Western dominance is just wait. Is that correct? Have you heard about this?
I would say it's an alternative route. I would say for when it comes to China, not all would benefit, but actually we're very close to be able to have this route fully operational. And the gain, actually, China would gain in terms of timing. Timing, time-wise would be so time and cost. So what China needs to do is diversification of trade routes. But the cheapest way is always by the sea. But now they have this Belt and Road Initiative, which is going inland. And this idea is it's a diversification. It's a way to recycle US dollar trade surplus. And it's also to help those landlocked countries to have access to trade. You see all those, like Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and so on. They don't have access to the sea. So they are helping those countries to have access to other markets.
So you'd say this northern route is just a secondary bonus that might open up in.
Well, it could be massive. It could be massive over time. I mean, and would be a great help for China. Absolutely, China. The biggest risk for China right now, it's probably a blockade of the Malacca Strait.
Yeah,
it's the same. It's as sensitive as what we're seeing now in the Strait of. The Red Sea. And actually that's a game changer. Not many people are talking about this, but that is a huge, huge game changer. And people are talking about this alternative routes, which is going through UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. This is absurd. It's actually fake news. It's absurd, it's fake news because I have some knowledge of shipping, but it will cost you double. And actually, the lead time would be also double. It might take more time by road than going all around Africa.
Are you referring to that shipping route that goes through, as you said, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and then goes to
by land.
Israel, to the Black Sea?
No,
Mediterranean.
That road. It's all BS. And I actually, who has been pushing this narrative where the Zionists, and the West, because they want to downplay what the Houthi Ansar Allah are doing, because it's a huge humiliation. Yeah, but this is a game changer. It's a huge game changer.
It's actually effective sanctions, right? By the Houthis.
It is crazy. It's crazy. It's just amazing what is happening. And and with very little means, you got actually controlling the collective West. They never thought this could happen.
All right, so let me pivot. I'm not quite away from what we're talking about, since we just talked about Israel. I've seen you post a lot about Gaza, and you're clearly incredibly indignant about what's happening. I guess so am I, but I do feel a bit of that powerlessness that Bushnell was referring to. But let me just ask you something that is maybe on an emotional basis a bit pointed, which is that on an intellectual level, and I mean purely intellectual level, I would say that what's happening in Gaza is much less interesting than what's happening in Ukraine, because Ukraine is a very complex geopolitical pivot, whereas in Gaza, it's fairly simple. It's just a horrible genocidal act by a colonial power, killing countless civilians without any control and trying to push them away. Would you agree with that assessment, or do you think there's also a lot more complexity in Gaza? Just intellectually on the first, before we delve into the to the more.
Well, I would say we should never forget that Ukraine was the trigger. That's the trigger. I think this is one front. This is second front. I see those as two fronts. I would say that Palestinian struggle embodies really the imperialistic project, and it touches the whole global south. I mean, that's the implication. And I think it's probably on the symbolistic side, it's much deeper what happened in Gaza. And also because that project, I think the Zionist project really embodies the US Western imperialism. You know, at the end of the day, the Zionist project was the British Empire wanted to create for what they call a foreign entity, and the Zionist approached the British Empire, and they struck a deal, and they were willing to fulfill this task, to have this advanced force in the Middle East, which
Unsinkable
was
aircraft carrier, right?
it was the 1907 the Empire Convention. You know, I mean, Bannerman was Bannerman. His name was Bannerman, something in 2 words. But anyway, so it was to fulfill, and the idea was to divide the Arab world, because they knew there was oil, and it was very dangerous to have this whole entity of the Arab world. You know, because it was prior to this notion of nation state, it was a huge Arab world which was very powerful, and it had a unique, kind of a combined entity, which could be a problem in the long term. And they wanted to have access to those resources, but in order to do that, they had to divide.
And that's also strike all these partnerships with the different kingdoms over there. Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
It was a divide and control, and that was the function of the Zionist project, which by the way is very anti-Semitic in itself. So I mean, even though the real Semites, by the way, the real Semites are Palestinians, not Israelis. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I used to bring that. I used to bring that in arguments. I used to bring that in arguments to say that, actually, technically speaking, the Palestinians are just from the same Semite people as the Jewish, but I guess the word anti-Semitic has evolved to mean purely, against Jews. So fair enough, words evolve. But
you see that, but this is actually important. It used to be, sensitive topic, but in reality, the first to define Jews as a race was racist people. I mean, Hitler wanted to define Jews as a race, but it's not a race. It's a religion.
Religious group.
It's a religion, and most of Jews are European descent. So in reality, we turn, this whole idea of anti-Semite and so on and racist. It's not actually, they are religion, and Zionist is an ideology which has used the religion for political purpose. I mean, but it's taboo. But you know what? They might say, well, it's racist to say that. It's exactly the opposite. It's the same as one that is advocating, blacks, this identity and so on. Well, they are the racist one, because if you don't mention I am black, I don't even think about that you are black.
Of course, yeah.
You see my point is that, it's not a race. It's
putting your finger on this ethnic division is the actual source of racism, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let me finish up, I guess, since we're approaching the quarter past time mark, with another question, I guess, on Gaza, which is, I just came back from Thailand. I stayed there for about 4 weeks. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to meet Brian. We were on this island, Kopangan, which is famous for, I guess, partying, which is not quite my thing, but there's a lot of hippie crowd over there. And I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of the hippie crowd is Israeli. And so I was there just going on a dinner, and there was this woman that was sitting next to me, and we quickly get embroiled into a conversation. And I was just very curious, and I asked her, so this is all to say that this whole Israel conflict hits fairly close to home, because I also have a friend who's one of his best friends got killed in the Nova Festival, and I wanted to have a podcast with him, but in the end he refused. I guess that's when he started realizing what's happening, because in the early days he had the Israel flag all over the place, and I was trying to point out to him very carefully that maybe this emotional reaction is leading to more harm than you actually think. But yeah, let's put that aside. In any case, I was talking to this hippie lady, and I asked her, where does this whole hippie crowd from Israel come from? Like, where does this huge hippie community come from? And she said that the people there are doing this psytrance hippie therapy from the hardships they experience in the military, because in Israel everyone goes through the military system, right? And very quickly we got embroiled into the on discussion about what's happening, and I was trying to point out that on October 7th, of the 1,200 people, 400 were militants. of the rest of the civilians, most of them were killed because of the Hannibal directive of the IDF. I was trying to point out that there's over 25,000 civilians and that this is an utter absurdity. I was trying to point out that this is not a war. This is a massacre. A war would be one force fighting another force. But what we have here is 300,000 soldiers with an air force, with heavy equipment, with IFVs, with mortar support, with ISR technology and support from other countries, going against, at the most, 30,000 orphans. Well, not orphans. Yeah, orphans. Those are the people without parents, right? Living in tunnels. This is not a war. This is a massacre. In any case, the lady doubted the numbers of the deaths. She didn't even let me speak about the whole atrocity of October 7 because she was trying to speak again and again and again and didn't seem to want to let me speak freely. And she was skeptical about the deaths in the West Bank because I pointed out that in the West Bank last year 300 people died, the year before 250 people died, the year before 150 people died, the year before 200 people died, and there's no Hamas there. And she even doubted the whole settler colonial affair. So here's, I guess, after my long speech.
And they're supposed to be open-minded, right? Those
exactly.
are supposed to, yeah,
how do
absolutely.
we talk to this new generation that is being pumped out from the Israeli military that are, she said that she goes regularly in protests against Netanyahu, which I admired, I guess. But how do we talk to these people to make them realize that you go through this military, which is already an indoctrination machine? How do you reach these people?
It is tough. You know, I mean, again, it's about the homework. But when you grow up into this whole environment, I was even thinking, just imagine those parents that are denying the food to those people in Gaza. I mean, 2 million people are starving. And what are they teaching to their kids? I mean, I'm blocking the road to trucks and we have people dying on the other side. It's an experiment of indoctrination, which is extremely scary. And I would say, you see the parallels with Nazis, it's quite scary, but you see what they're doing is that not only, I mean, at least that, I mean, the Nazis, we have the excuse that we didn't know, okay? There's one excuse, I mean, kind of. But the problem is that they are bragging about it. That is the thing. If you talk to Zionists, they are bragging about it. And they're saying openly what they want to do. They open. You see the final solutions when it came to Hitler, it was, you know, I mean, we don't have trace of that, but it was behind closed door. There's not even a single paper that actually says, you know, as a proof, we had this final solution. This is, you know, because it was done over closed door. Now, when you have its own social media, every influencer, every politicians, they are telling clearly that we are going to starve them and we are going to, if not genocide them, but, you know, ethnically cleansing them. And if this comes down to the people on the street, you have an approval total. And that is the pro-Netanyahu against Netanyahu, the same. You see the same, they cannot trick it. It's the whole ideology. And what saddens me is really like this whole knowledge really about the nature of the Zionist project, but also the history itself. If you really think about the history itself, I actually watched a very interesting video. You know, the best reference when it comes to Palestine is the Intifada, electronic Intifada. It's a channel. And I will give you a link maybe later, but there's someone that actually wrote a book there, and he said he's explaining that actually the Zionist movement was they sided with the Nazi back then, and they made sure, you know, the Jews, they could escape the Holocaust and they could go to Europe, to the US, and so on. But the Zionists prevented that because they wanted to send them to Palestine, and they could not send them hundreds of thousands of them. They could send only a few of them. So many hundreds of thousands of Jews died in the camps because the Zionists, they were using that for the narrative, but also because they wanted not them to go to European countries or the US, but to go to Palestine. You see, even Zionists, the Zionists, they never care about Jews. It was, and you know, they even reinterpreted the Torah, because the Torah is very clear. You're not supposed to go back to the land of Israel
until the temple is rebuilt. So I told that to this lady, to this Israeli lady, and the second I mentioned the word Zionist, she said, you know, Zionist is only those people that want the Jews to have their own homeland, right? And I mean, then I mentioned the thing with the temple, but she said that even just mentioning the word Zionist is like a propaganda scheme. So, but again, what you say requires all this knowledge, which again makes it very difficult.
You see, I mean, you and I, we don't have skin in the game. I mean, to be honestly, I'm interested intellectually. You know, what I want is really facts. What upsets me, it's not actually opinions. I have nothing against people with different opinions. What I want is that people are honest enough to agree upon the facts.
Yeah.
You know, and I dig, you know, really when I
That's
go
a big
into
thing you want there.
but when I go into a topic, you know, I went to, you know, I read like Shlomo. You know, my first book was Au Jérusalem, Dominique Lapierre, who did an amazing book. But you know, I read many books, but I read also Shlomo Sanz. You know, Shlomo Sanz is a Tel Aviv University professor that wrote about the invention of the Jewish nation. And, you know, I mean, those are history professors. And, you know, and you really dig into what they said and the whole plan. And what I want is that, you know, you need to agree about the facts. And then opinions, I have no problem. A Zionist that actually doesn't have the same opinion as me. But if he lies upon on the facts, that's intellectually.
Problem.
That hurts me. That hurts me. It's insult. I find, you know, opinions don't insult me, but manipulating the fact insults me.
I'm as a physicist and someone who just keeps wanting to see the truth, I'm exactly on your side. So since since you said you only had 1 hour, Angelo, let me just wrap up by adding 2 points to what you just said, which is about the whole thing about facts and the truth. Firstly, as far as I know, both Chomsky and Finkelstein are the strongest databases, the strongest intellectuals on the topic. And it was so sweet to see Norman Finkelstein destroy Alan Dershowitz in his argumentation, in his debate on Democracy Now! And the same was true for Chomsky destroying Dershowitz. So basically, you take the highest order of the intellectuals arguing pro-Israel, and as soon as you have someone with a sufficient knowledge like Chomsky or Finkelstein, they get destroyed in a factual debate. And the second thing about the facts is I wrote my Ukraine article in a very similar spirit. There's a neat reformulation on the scientific method, which is the quest for truth, right? That goes back to Karl Popper. I read it in a book by David Deutsch. It's how I introduced my article. It's just about good explanations and bad explanations. I guess we don't have time to get into it, but it's an excellent method how in one paragraph you can see what's a good explanation, and a good explanation is usually the truth. You know, without needing to know a whole library of facts in your head, you can just apply the scientific method and realize whether this is probably true or probably not true. And finally, let me finish up with a final personal question to you. Just how sad were you to realize that Victoria Nuland is resigning?
No, but you know, yeah, resigning. But you know, I don't know. We don't have all the transparency. But me, I mean, I wrote a tweet about this. I wouldn't be surprised that this is she might do the revolving door. You know, she might have the big payback. I mean, this is a huge payback. Just think about this. Those people. This is why all the U.S. politicians are millionaires. Is because they do the revolving door. So they go back and forth from politics to private. So what happens that you know there's a time lag between the corruption. So Victoria Nuland, she made sure that we had chaos and war. And actually they spent between 5 and 10 billion. Now they're talking about 10 billion over Ukraine, you know, for regime change. But, you know, they spend so much money, and actually a lot of money was laundered into the military industrial complex and BlackRock and so on. So now is the big payback time that she's going to get a position where she's going to make millions. So that is the delayed gratification, delayed corruption. So that's the big payback time that she's going to have. I mean, otherwise, I mean, she's not going to make the money when she has the position in the government. That is payback time now. And maybe probably Ukraine is falling apart. She doesn't want to be. I mean, you know, you don't,
Yeah.
the rats
The rats
are
are, yeah.
taking the ship.
So what you're saying is you're devastated to see her go, and and you expect to see her tomorrow in the board of directors of
Oh,
Raytheon,
you know
right?
what? I think there's plenty of other Nuland that are going to replace.
Mm,
They have the potential, you know, Nikki Haley. I don't know. I mean, you know,
yeah.
I mean, you know, this it's bad. You know, yeah, every time you think you hit the bottom, you get someone worse. I mean, really, look at. I mean, is it the best that the US has to offer? I mean,
Yeah.
really, I mean, all those clowns, Biden, Trump, Nikki Haley. I mean, come on. There's so many smart people out there. I mean, really, in terms of personality, I mean, Nuland, Clinton. I mean, that's
Sullivan.
I mean, AOC. I mean, I don't see a single one that I can say what is. I mean, Galloway, he inspires me. You know, Galloway. Oh my God, really, that is the change. He's the change. But I mean, the rest really. I mean, where are we going?
Yeah.
Where are we going, really?
Anyways, it was a pleasure. Thank you for your time, Angelo.
My pleasure. My
I
pleasure.
hope I might see you another time sometime.
Absolutely, with pleasure.
Of course. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
lovely
you.
evening, and thank you for being on so late for me.